Hi, welcome to Navigate for Faculty, issuing academic alerts. So what is Navigate? Navigate is a new system that we're starting here at UW-Bothell that helps to better connect groups like faculty, students, advising, student support services, all together on one single platform called Navigate. For a student, what this looks like is it's a way for them to schedule appointments with people like their advisors, or perhaps financial aid or other student support services. For advising and those student support services, they'll use Navigate to communicate with students, to make appointments with students, and perhaps most importantly, to get a complete picture of those students. So they can see things like enrollments and grades and use of services across campus and academic alerts from faculty. So from the faculty's perspective, what we use Navigate for is one, progress reports, and two, academic alerts. And I'll differentiate between those two things in a moment. And then thirdly, we can use Navigate to connect students with advisors and with other support services across campus. So before we had Navigate, we did already have this kind of communication going on, right? We had a variety of ways to connect with students, to track interactions with students, to create reports on various groups of students. But these ways were kind of split among a multiplicity of communication methods, telephones and email and Excel charts and submission forms. And what this did is it made it hard for students to often know who to contact for support, hard for faculty to know who to connect students to for support, hard for advisors to know when a student had actually received support from one of these various support services, and hard for the support services to know if a student actually needed their help, okay? So as kind of an example of how it used to work, I want you to imagine Holly Husky, all right? Now imagine Holly Husky is struggling. She has income insecurity. And because of this, she's having housing concerns. And she also might have tuition and fee problems, and she's suffering from depression, and she's withdrawing from her peers. Perhaps she has relationship issues. As a faculty member, we might not see any of those things. We might only see that Holly is missing classes and turning in poor assignments or no assignments. So in the past, what would happen is, let's say Holly is enrolled in 3 different classes, right? And she might reach out to faculty person number 3 and say, hey, I need help in this class. And perhaps that person doesn't get back to her in a timely manner, okay? Luckily, faculty member number 2 notices that Holly is missing her class as well. And so reaches out to Holly and says, hey, you're missing my class. Can I, figure out what's going on? Can I help you? And Holly gets back and says, yes, I'm having problems. So faculty member number 2 issues what was called an early alert to the advising staff, okay? So advising reaches out to Holly, Holly gets back to them and says, here's all the problems I'm having. Advising says, aha, this is a care report issue. And so they reach out to the care team. And the care team gets things going. The care team reaches out to Residence Life and the counseling center and Holly. Well, then that's kind of out of the care team's hands, right? And so then Residence Life reaches out to Holly, and the counseling center reaches out to Holly. Holly ignores Residence Life and gets back, luckily, with the counseling center, and then independently talks to financial aid. And then she figures out her financial situation. Things start looking up for her. She gets back on track, and she reaches out independently to the Writing Center and the Quantitative Skills Center to get her classwork back on track. The issue is, all these various groups had some communication, but not a structured, unified communication, right? We weren't really talking to each other. And we were putting a lot of reliance on Holly to be the kind of communication hub for all these various support structures, right? So the student is the hub before Navigate, and the communication is a little kind of confusing, okay? With Navigate, we move Holly off to the side, and Navigate becomes the hub. So this confusing maze of communications kind of disappears and is replaced by direct communications from all the different spokes right into Navigate, okay? So to sum up the transition from what we had before to Navigate, then Holly was the hub. The student was the hub. Holly, the student, had to reach out for support independently, and advisors and support services didn't necessarily know who else Holly had contacted. Now, Navigate will be the hub. Support services will independently reach out to Holly, and our support is coordinated amongst the various advising staff and support services that are available. So, as a faculty member, you're going to be using Navigate in one of two ways. And these are the two ways that I mentioned a little bit earlier. So one is progress reports. And progress reports regard every student in your class. And you'll actually get a request from your school or your program or from an advisor that says, hey, please submit our progress report on your entire class, okay? And this is approximately, it'll happen in maybe week 2 and then maybe week 6 after midterms, dependent on the school or program or advising staff that reaches out to you. Now, not every class is going to get a progress report. These will be targeted to classes that are kind of gateway classes or often classes meant for first-year students. The other way that you can use Navigate is through academic alerts. And that is typically involving individual students, one at a time. You're seeing a problem, they're failing your class, they're having behavioral issues, whatever it is, and you issue that alert on that student of your own accord, right? So when would you issue an alert for a student? So in Navigate, we've set up a series of reasons that you might issue an alert. The first section of them are are called reports, right? So we have a participation attendance report, a low assessment report, a missing or incomplete work report, personal challenges report, referred to tutoring report, or notable achievement report, okay? The next section are ones that are a request for an advisor to do something. So they're at risk to fail, advisor intervention required. Student services referral requested, or an advisor phone call to the faculty member is requested. And finally, we have one that's in there that sends a kudos email to the student. It says, hey, you're doing a really good job. How these things are labeled, reports versus requests versus an email, actually depends on what's going to happen after you submit the report. So if you submit one of these early reports, low assessment, personal challenges, participation, it doesn't open a case anywhere. No one's made aware of this. It just goes into the student's file, right? So no action is going to be taken. If an advisor happens to look at the student's case, they'll see this report in there, but it won't like bling up on anyone's computer. The next 3 reasons, at risk to fail, student services referrals, and advisor phone calls, that will actually open a case with an advisor. It'll also enter this into the student's file, but the case allows you, the faculty member, to know that when something's been done, right? So you'll get a notification that the case has been closed by that advisor once they close it. And finally, the email to the student. No case is opened, again, no advisor is notified, but a note is made in the student's file. And a kind of generic kudos email is sent out saying, hi student, your professor said you did a great job, keep it up, right? When would you not use Navigate? Now this gets a little confusing because there are some overlaps, right? So there are 4 other services that feel very similar to some of the things that you might issue an alert for. So Care Report, Safe Campus, 911, and Campus Safety. So I want to discuss those really quickly to try to differentiate when you would use those 4 services as opposed to using a Navigate academic alert, right? So 911 is probably the easiest, right? So let's get 911 out of the way, right? If your student is on fire, if there's a medical emergency or a criminal activity is ongoing, like a robbery or domestic violence, sexual assault, dangerous situations, please call 911. Do not issue an academic alert. 911 for any kind of pressing fire, medical emergency, or criminal activity. Um, campus safety is the next one. And this campus safety is for things like when you're locked out of your classroom, or you need your car jumped, your battery is dead, or you need a safety escort from your classroom to your car. Those are great times to call campus safety. Note, you're not calling them when someone's on fire or dying, right? You can call them after you call 911, but first call 911, okay? The next category is the safe campus calls. This is when you witness or experience threats of harm to a student. They're kind of threatening to hurt themselves, or they're threatening to hurt others. When you see students referring to school shootings, or kind of aligning themselves with school shooters, and it causes concern for you, or generally inappropriate behavior, such as outbursts of anger, or they're crossing boundaries, like they're kind of stalking you, excessive calls or excessive office visits, or sexual assault or harassment, including stalking or relationship violence. Those are all great times to call Safe Campus. And just so you know, Safe Campus, they'll walk you through the best way to deal with the situations you're describing to them, but they're not located on the UW-Bothell campus. It's a call center somewhere, and they will help you out and connect you with the right resources. But just so you know, they're not the same thing as campus safety, despite the confusing name. Care reports. So care reports are when you're concerned for the student's well-being. You can also use a care report for bias or perceived bias, for academic classroom or behavioral misconduct, or if there's a victim of a sexual misconduct. Care reports are, as far as I'm concerned, primarily for cases where the student's academics may be at risk, but we're really kind of more worried about the student's well-being, right? So there might be financial or situational crisis in the student's life, or you might notice changes in their behavior or disruptive behavior in the classroom. Those might affect academics. We're calling the care team because it's at a level where you think that student just honestly needs some help, right? Navigate is where you are trying to get the advisors involved, right? So navigate is when there's poor academic performance or great academic performance, and the steps you've taken based on those either poor or great academic performance, right? So for poorer performance, things like participation or low grades, or they're missing work, or personal challenges that are affecting their academics, right? So there's a little bit of crossover there. So if they're having financial or medical or family issues, you might issue a care report for them, but you might also want to loop the advisors in by issuing a Navigate academic alert that issue with their well-being is affecting their academics. And then steps you've taken, right? So did you connect them with tutoring? Did you reach out to an advisor? And academic alerts aren't always just for poor academics, right? So they could have great performance. They could be doing some really cool things in your class. They could have gotten a great scholarship. These are times to use notable achievement and the kudos, just so you're looping in the advisors and UW-Bothell in general about what awesome students you have, right? So as an aside on these great academic performance types, I want to kind of differentiate those two. So we have a kudos alert reason, and that's mainly for work that happens in your class, right? So they're doing a great job. They're going above and beyond. They're engaging in discussions. They're, earning the highest grade on a paper or an exam. You see them working hard, attending lots of office hours that week to master the material. So that might be a great time to say, you know what, I want to let advising know and have this go on the student's record if they're really putting the effort in, right? Notable achievement are mainly for things that happen outside your class, right? You might help them with it, like help them with the application for some grant or scholarship, but these are achievements that the student might want to tell the dean, or you might see them published on the UW-Bothell website, or they might be listed on a student's resume, right? So with the kudos, that's going to send a generic email to the student, right? So it's going to say, hey, your professor said you're awesome, Great. It's going to go on their file as well. For notable achievement, it's going to send a generic email to the advisor saying, hey, my student did a great job. For both those reasons, if you just submit the alert without any sort of comments or notes attached to it, that's all anyone will ever know. So make sure when you submit these kind of kudos or notable achievement alerts that you're actually typing in what the kudo is for or what the notable achievement is, right? What if you don't know, after all this, who you're supposed to call or contact or which form you're supposed to use? What if it's a gray area where it kind of overlaps and it's behavioral but also academic? Don't stress about it. Report it to anyone that feels appropriate to you, that makes sense to you. And they will redirect you to the appropriate person. Like, don't call 911 because your student failed your exam. But so pick the one that makes sense to you if there's overlaps, and they're totally trained to help you also submit somewhere else if you need to, okay? So we have these two types, right? Faculty progress reports and academic alerts. So I wanted to kind of go through what these look like on your computers. So when you get a progress report request from an advisor or from your school or from a program, you will get an email, and it will just say request for progress report or something of that nature. Student feedback request is the one that I got last. You click on the link. It takes you to your login. You put in your UW-Net ID and log in, right? And it'll open up a kind of large chart. I can't pull up an actual current chart right now because the quarter hasn't started. And so there's no students listed. So this is one from the Navigate's website. So it doesn't look exactly like the UW-Bothell version of it, but roughly this is what it looks like, right? So it'll give you a place to put in alert reasons, to enter some comments. And when you submit this at the very bottom of the page, there'll be two ways to submit. One is to submit only the students that you have marked an alert for, and then you can come back later and submit things for other students. Or you can say, you know what, I only wanted to submit an alert on student number 2 and 3. I'm all done, everyone else is fine. I don't need to enter anything for anyone else. I'm gonna submit that I'm all done. Unmarked students are not at risk, right? So there's two ways you can do it. One is kind of like a partial submit. You can come back in, submit more if you want. And the second way is, yep, I'm good. I finished my progress report, done. Academic alerts are very similar. You have to actually, you have to go to this website, uwb.campus.eab.com, and log in with your NetID. And you'll come to this kind of professor home screen. And in there, there's an issue and alert link on the far right under actions. Click on that, and it will pull up this little kind of pop-up academic alert form. And you'll be able to kind of type in your student's name, and it will autofill their name. And you can select one or more of these reasons, these alert reasons. And then there's a place for additional comments, right? So as I mentioned before, for things like notable achievement, make sure you put the actual notable achievement in the additional comments. Otherwise, it's just going to say notable achievement, and that's all the advisor will see. Before you submit an academic alert, it's best practice to tell your student, well, first reach out to your student and say, hey, I'm seeing you're missing classes. Can I help? And then if that's, fails, or you still feel you need to reach out to an advisor, it's a good idea in most cases, and I leave it up to you obviously, but to notify the student that, hey, I reached out to the advising team, you may hear from them, right? Just so they don't feel like you're kind of going behind their back and reporting them to different people. Just kind of keep them in the loop so they know that you're concerned, and you're so concerned you want to loop in other people to help them out. Another note to mention is that when you submit an academic alert, you can and you should in various cases, use multiple alert reasons. And doing so will actually escalate or give you levels or gradations of how serious the alert is, right? So for example, if you enter a participation or attendance report, it's just going to add a note to the student's file, right? So an advisor may never see this participation or attendance report. But if it's so serious, you've entered a participation report almost every week now, right? They consistently fail to show up, or they come for 5 minutes and then leave and never come back. That's a case where you might want to escalate it to an advisor. So you can also click on the at risk to fail advisor intervention requested, right? And so now you have 2 alerts selected. The advisor will now be, a case will be opened, and they'll see from the other alerts you've concluded in this report what the issue is, right? And another way you can do it is you can ask for an advisor phone call. Well, we've changed the name of that, by the way, to advisor phone call to faculty requested. That's not going to be an advisor calling the student, that's an advisor calling you, right? Another thing to notice is when you fill out an alert, that comment field, right? The additional comment field, you don't have to put an essay in there. So keep it concise, but keep it meaningful, right? So if it's a participation attendance report, say how many times they've missed class, right? If it's low assessment, say, what they failed or what kind of grade they need to get on the next thing, and so on, right? So give information and context to the advisor. So when they reach out to the student, they can kind of talk to the student about what steps need to be taken next. And that brings me to FERPA. So as you know, the things we record about students become part of the student's educational record, and are therefore covered by FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So because these records, a lot of records are flowing into Navigate, and because part of FERPA requires that people only have access to those records if they have legitimate educational interests in those records, we actually restrict faculty rights to see a lot of things in Navigate. So you will have access to see the reports that you issued on your students. But you won't see notes that advisors make on those reports. You won't see other faculty's alerts or reports on their students or your students, right? So your access is restricted because at this point we're saying that not every faculty has a legitimate educational interest in seeing everything about a student. When you submit things, it is secure, though. It is a secure platform, so you can submit things like grades or attendance or behavior issues or any sort of personally identifiable information about the student. That's perfectly fine. As a word of warning, don't put anything in an alert that you wouldn't want published on the front of the Seattle Times, okay? Because students have a right to request their a review of their educational records, right? That includes academic alerts. So what you write in your academic alert has to be factual, and it has to be written in as objective a way as is possible to write, right? So don't make value judgments, don't make suppositions or guesses about what you think might be happening, just the facts, right? And use appropriate language. Okay, on that dire warning, I'll leave it there for now. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My name is Gavin Doyle, and my email address is gdoyle@uw.edu. That's GDOYLE@uw.edu. All right, thanks. Hope that was helpful.